Welcome back. I just want to give you a little bit of additional information about the eraser exercise. I think it's helpful in some instances to know a little bit of background or have more of an appreciation for what an exercise is supposed to do. We certainly won't cover it very comprehensively because there's a lot of stuff that we don't want in your mind. We don't want you putting the course practices into little mental boxes that prevent progress, but there are some things that are helpful for you to know. The eraser exercise in this form is a very physically oriented exercise. And the great thing about a physical exercise is that it involves the body. The great thing about the body is that it can only live in the present moment. And so this version of the eraser exercise does a great job of bringing you into the present moment. Your body is your interface to the present moment. It focuses your mind out of thinking about the future or the past and into focusing on what is happening right now. For the vast majority of our day, we're really not paying attention to the present moment. We're happy to outsource that to a bunch of background processes in our brain that monitor whether or not we're safe and whatever else is going on in the present moment. Then our mind is free to do what? Drift right into the past, into the future, into some fantasy, into whatever. And then every now and then those background processes kind of startle us and, oh, wait a minute, what's going on here? Yeah, okay, take care of that. Yep, okay. Back to the past, the future, whatever, right? It's very important to start to train our attention back to noticing the present moment. We want to break the pattern of drifting so often into the past, future, fantasy, and so on. You might be wondering, why is this exercise called the eraser exercise? The answer is because it does a very good job of bringing up psychological conditioning, things that happened in your past and were programmed into your psyche at some point, and beginning to erase them. To understand how that happens, we have to get a little bit into some psychology. I'm just going to touch on it lightly. You can search the web if you want to know more about this. There's all kinds of information out there about it. This primarily relates to one subdiscipline within the overall psychology space called behaviorism. Now, for a very long time in psychology, behaviorism reigned supreme as the number one way of looking at our psyche. About 60 years ago or so, that started falling out of favor. And though it's still widely used in clinical practice, it's not looked upon necessarily as strongly by other parts of the academic research world. It still relates to a lot of our core physical and physiological and psychological and sort of the intersection of all of these mechanisms, however. It's just not quite as cool as it used to be, since things like EEG and being able to read brain waves and fMRI and its ability to detect complex patterns deep in the brain and so on have come onto the scene. Neuroscience is just a lot sexier than good old behaviorism these days. By contrast, behaviorism looks a little old, looks a little boring, looks a little dated. And so it's just not getting the love that it used to from the psychology establishment. However, it is still every bit as valid as it always has been. And it's a staple in the clinical community, which is where the rubber meets the road in terms of actually helping people, not just sort of researching things and trying to find out more about the brain and so forth. The reality is that in every moment, there are processes running in our body that are psychologically conditioning us. So right now, I'm sitting a certain way. I'm making certain facial expressions. You're sitting a certain way. You're doing certain things. And I have absolutely no idea why either one of us are doing these things. I don't know why I'm doing these things. You don't know why you're doing these things. But there's a great meta explanation for them, and that's behaviorism. You see, our body's constantly doing trial and error all the time. It's constantly assessing, is someone paying attention to me? Am I learning in an optimal way? Am I controlling my attention in the best way to learn? Things like that in a context like this anyway. There's, this sort of core dynamic that's happening around all of this. We've all been programmed through a lot of this trial and error. My body in the background through this behaviorism process has programmed itself through a lot of trial and error that says, when I inflect my voice like this, and when I move my head like this, and when I look at you a certain way, it engages you more. And so, unconsciously, I just naturally do it. And if that changes over time, my body sort of changes and adapts and learns with it. It's all happening sort of under the hood, so to speak. Conversely, on your side, however you're sitting and whatever you're doing, your body has basically performed a whole ton of experiments over the many years in your life, and it's distilled down what it's learned is the best for optimally doing, what you're doing at this moment. So you're focusing your attention, you're trying to learn and pay attention to what I'm saying and really take it in and understand it and grasp it. It's taken all of those experiments and it's trying to give you the best edge to do that right now. So we're the result of an enormous amount of physiological and psychological experimentation that we're not even aware of. It's been, performed without us even knowing it in most cases. It's being performed right now, and we're still, even right now, even though we're talking about it, was completely unaware of it. All of these things that I'm talking about, all of this programming that we have, it's all under revision in every moment, all the time. If it's active, it's under revision. You've probably heard the story of Dr. Ivan Pavlov and his dogs. So Dr. Pavlov was a famous Russian researcher and a pioneer in the area of behaviorism. He's often used to illustrate sort of the classical examples of conditioning within behaviorism. Basically, he would ring a bell and he would give a dog some food. And he'd just keep doing that. Bell, food, bell, food, bell, food, and so on, right? And then one day, he wouldn't give the dog the food. He'd just ring the bell. And guess what happened? The dog would salivate just as if he was giving it food. When the dog's body heard the bell, it just assumed food was coming. And, it better get ready to digest the food. So it started to salivate. That's a very simple and easy to understand explanation of how this type of conditioning process is at work in all of us all the time. You undo conditioning with a process called extinction. To continue with our Dr. Pavlov example, what you do is you just keep ringing the bell without giving the dog food. And eventually, all of that trial and error inside the dog says, hey, wait a minute. I don't think that bell was associated with food all the time after all. Boy, did I get that one wrong. And then it stops salivating when you ring the bell, but don't give it food. Of course, all of that happens at an unconscious level. And when it does, again, the body of the dog no longer salivates when the bell rings. It's the same process that works for us when it comes to extinguishing conditioning. One of the things that happens is anytime we're in a meditation and we have a distracting thought or body sensation or emotion or memory or whatever, what we're really doing is experiencing conditioning. We're experiencing our past conditioning, our past programming coming up. What we want to do is increasingly extinguish that conditioning and reach an internal experience that has more equanimity, more balance, more distance from these types of things and their ability to distract us, where we're less affected by them, and so on. When we're meditating and a thought comes up, we don't want to be sucked into that thought. We don't want to have it hijack us and take over and take us on a long, fanciful or painful or whatever journey, only to have us come out a few minutes later and be like, oh, crap, I was supposed to be meditating. Or if it happens at other times, oh crap, I was supposed to be working on this report. Now I don't have time to finish it. Or wait a minute, where'd my daughter go? Or whatever, right? So you want to make sure that you're using meditation optimally to do deconditioning, to do this extinction process. And if you think back to Pavlov's example, bell, no food, bell, no food, bell, no food, bell. It really just comes down to breaking an unconscious association that's been made inside your nervous system. To choose memories, as an example, oftentimes when a memory comes up, there's a whole chain of things that are kicked off. Thoughts, emotions, all sorts of stuff happen. And they all reinforce that memory and oftentimes each other. And then the memory is re-encoded in a certain way. It may surprise you to know that our memories are actually very dynamic. When you call them up, they get restored. Each time they're restored, they change. So our memories change a lot over time. That means, there's good news in this. We can change them in positive, deliberate ways that we choose to. If a negative memory comes up, instead of allowing its accompanying, yucky emotion or whatever, to just ride along with it and get programmed right back in, and maybe even get programmed in stronger this time, we can make a different choice. Maybe typically every time that memory comes up, what normally happens for us is we just get more and more angry about what happened. And guess what happens? We're creating an angrier and angrier memory when we do that. We don't want to do that. So we can use our meditation sessions to give us a little bit of distance from this. And when a memory comes up, even if it's got a lot of anger or whatever, over time we can learn during the meditation process to just let it come up and just to watch it and to weaken the negative emotion or whatever accompanies it over time increasingly. Now, initially, maybe we'll get sucked right back in, just like when a memory comes up normally. That's fine. But the second time, the third time, the fourth time, you can start to get some distance. You can start to get a little space around these things. One of the things that starts to happen is you begin to realize, gosh, everything in my awareness seems to be just kind of coming and going. Well, that's a great place to reach because now things have got plenty of space around them. If you're noticing that stuff is temporary, that when that memory comes up, it doesn't just suck you in and instead you're like, oh, there it is. Oh, now it's going away. Now a thought's coming. Oh, there it is. Now it's going away. That's super powerful because each time something comes up, it gets restored. And rather than restoring it with that full charge or even greater charge than it had before, you're starting to weaken that association. Now, think back to our example of an angry memory. Instead of getting restored with the same or more anger each time, now when it comes up, you have some distance from it. You're in the opposite kind of spiral where it has less and less anger each time until eventually it's neutral or even positive. And you can, in fact, just reprogram a memory to be positive. We'll have an optional exercise later in the program that you can use to do that. That's been hugely effective for many, many people. This is very powerful because all of this unconscious programming not only runs and affects a lot of your life, but also how you feel much of the time. So we just want you to be able to increasingly get some distance from these things. And the best way to get distance from them is to watch them. When they come up, just watch them. You'll increasingly get less and less pulled in by these thoughts, emotions, memories, and so on. The more you do this, the more they're just something that comes up that you watch, something that you get more and more peace and equanimity and distance from, the better your moment-to-moment experience outside of meditation and your inner emotional life and so on will become. What you're actually watching in real time is just the psychological deconditioning process. It's not anything more than that. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a couple of more points to consider around the eraser exercise, what it's actually doing and why we call it the eraser exercise, because I think it's helpful to understand a bit more about the psychology processes involved so that you can really maximally take advantage of them. That's it for this video. I'll see you next time.